Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we learn about Youth for Christ. Teens today are subject to stress, fear, and uncertainty at unprecedented levels. They're finding support in a growing movement to return to the Christian roots on which this country was built, and they see hope for the future. Let's meet our guests, Mark Moyer, Parnell Davis, and Jessica Pape from Heartland Youth for Christ. Welcome to the show. Mark, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Youth for Christ.
Hey, Peter. It's nice to be with you today. My name is Mark Moyer. I serve as the executive director at Heartland Youth for Christ. And what my role is I do a lot of development work and vision for the ministry and work with an excellent team. And one thing I really love about this ministry is I was a kid that had a very rough background, parents divorced when I was really young and got into some things I shouldn't have got into, dropped out of school. And I had somebody enter into my life and a mentor and spoke with me some truth about Christ. And it changed the trajectory of my life. And so I'm super excited about this ministry because I see myself in some of these kids.
All right, let's hear from Jessica.
Yeah, I'm Jessica Pape. So I have the privilege of serving as ministry director. So our chapter covers most of Eastern Iowa. And within my role, helping our ministry team to establish our goals, kind of our strategies for how we go and we meet teens really where they're at. So whether that's in the schools or in coffee shops or the skate parks, wherever it is, looking at how are we being intentional and moving in those directions. And like Mark, I have a similar thread of a story where growing up, I lost a sister very suddenly and went through a lot of just changes that way and became a teen mom. And the challenges that came alongside that. And when I think about our teens today and what they face and the statistics that are out there, I also had people that really stepped into my life and offered hope and spoke a lot of truth and grace into my life. So being able to come alongside our ministry staff as well as over 100 volunteers and reaching volunteers or reaching more students is just really fulfilling and hopeful in that regard too.
All right, let's meet Parnell.
Yeah, hi. My name is Parnell Davis, and I am the chapter advancement director. My role is to connect people to the mission of Youth for Christ in the form of advocacy, whether it's financially partnering with us, whether it's volunteering with us. It's getting people excited about the mission of Youth for Christ. And the reason why I'm excited about it is because I grew up in a single family home. I grew up, obviously biracial in a primarily Caucasian environment. So I had a lot of identity issues growing up. And so that helped shape me. God used that to shape my story. And, I worked at a juvenile treatment facility for 10 years. So I had an opportunity to work with a lot of kids who are at risk. And so when I got introduced to the mission of Youth for Christ in 2015, it excited me. And it's a blessing and a privilege to serve along Mark and Jessica and our whole team at Heartland Youth for Christ.
You know, the world has changed a lot, Mark, since we were kids and you were kids. And it seems as if, and let me know if you think this is the case, that a lot more kids feel stressed and fearful than I ever remembered.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Kids definitely are really trying to search for identity now, and they feel alone. And coming out of the COVID, there was some research done where kids wanted to be noticed, named, and known. And you would think with the age today, with all of the digital connection and social media, even though everybody's so connected, they're still isolated and they feel alone. And to me, that's amazing to me because we're the most connected generation of any time, yet they're the most lonely. And kids are taking their lives every 2 hours and 11 minutes. It's even less than that now, I'm sure. Suicide, and that's a lot of hopelessness. And we believe there's a lot of hope actually out there.
Jessica, what are you hearing from the kids? I mean, you're obviously all very well versed in at-risk backgrounds when people grow up in some situations where they have to cope with some unique things, but we're seeing more and more kids, it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is or economic strata. It seems that all kids are having a problem now. What are you seeing in Youth for Christ in terms of the kind of population of kids that's coming to you?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is initially when I was introduced to Youth for Christ, my first thought was that it was for at-risk youth. And we're seeing that now, when you really look at what it means for a child to be at risk, there are so many different benchmarks that truly majority of our students today are at risk. And I think, we talk about media and technology, and just looking at that regard, the number of things that a person sees every day that it can be very traumatic things and very real life things, but they come so much faster at teens today. And so for us, when we ask teens, where they hang out, what do they do? Majority of teens are just hanging out in their rooms and being isolated themselves. So we really work to step in those gaps.
After a short break, we'll continue our conversation with Mark, Parnell, and Jessica and learn more about how Youth for Christ is making a difference for Iowa teens. Stay tuned.
Malware and bots and worms, oh my. The wild, wild web can be a scary and complex place. And as our digital world expands, so too are the threats. Watch out, Trojan horse. That's why at MediaCom, we take security very seriously and monitor our networks around the clock to stop threats before they can affect you. Not today, rude kid. Not all internet is created equal. We build ours to keep you connected and protected.
Watching MC22 is now easier than ever before. All MediaCom customers can watch local programming online anytime. Go to mc22.net, click Watch MC22, and log in with your MediaCom account. Not a MediaCom cable subscriber? MediaCom internet or phone subscribers can watch too. Your local programming leader, MC22, online at mc22.net/watch.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all. If I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Mark, Parnell, and Jessica from Youth for Christ. And it seems like problems that teens face have grown. When we look at families and the issues they face, one question is it possible that the loss of faith in the last couple decades has something to do with it? Parnell, you had some ideas on that issue. What would you have to say?
Yeah, I think that it has a lot to do with it. And what we're seeing here, throughout Eastern Iowa is this outcry for hope. We had a wave of teen suicides, as Mark alluded to earlier, in Southeast Iowa alone a couple years ago. And, there's this desire for hope. And, we believe that the only hope that this world can find is in Jesus. And so when you have a lack of faith and yet you have a culmination of disasters, we just recently had a tremendous tragedy in Perry, Iowa recently. We see a lot of people that are just looking for hope. And again, we believe that hope can be found in Jesus.
One thing I've heard, and Parnell, you still might be the best one to answer this, is that a lot of young kids growing up today have absolutely no idea of a Christian or faith-based life because they're not growing up at homes that have faith-based habits. Do you find that true with a lot of kids that find Youth for Christ?
It's interesting. Yeah, we find that. And, one thing that I've said quite often is, oftentimes I feel some of the most unreached kids are oftentimes church kids and youth group kids, because we assume that everything is good in their life because they're going to church. And quite often we find that sin, destruction, hardship, the enemy, who we believe is Satan, is attacking kids of all genders, of all races, regardless of whether they go to church or not. And so, yeah, I believe a lack of faith is definitely a part of the reason why we're seeing so much tragedy in today's youth, but it's also creating an outcry for hope, which is why I believe the movement of Youth for Christ is exploding here in Eastern Iowa.
Yeah, and it is exploding. I think, Mark, you were telling me that now you cover a rather large geographic area in Eastern Iowa.
That's correct. Yeah, we Cedar Rapids all the way to Dubuque, and you guys help me out because it's like it's spread, and then all the way down to Keokuk, and right, is that farthest south we go? Sorry, I'm from South Carolina, so you get y'alls, and I have to like get my demographics straight. But I mean, we're just this massive area. So yeah, we are.
No, that's great to see that success. Jessica, how does the connection with parents go with Youth for Christ? Are there programs that integrate parents too and get them involved? How are they sort of oriented to what you're doing?
You know, that is an interesting question. I would honestly say I wish we could get more parent involvement. You know, when we come alongside teens, a lot of times we're just building a relationship because they might not even have a good relationship at home. You know, a lot of times, especially coming back from breaks that students have, sometimes we hear things that their winter breaks, their summer breaks are not things that they look forward to because their homes are not those great environments. And so when we do different programs with them, we do a lot with food just because that can be one area that students are lacking. And especially our City Life programs, those are programs that really work to meet every need that a student has. So we do try to include parents in that because we know that for there to be life change, we have to make sure we're hitting all those angles. But it's a work in progress because it's really what a person grows up with and what their own understanding is and their own spiritual walk. So it takes a lot of devoted staff and a lot of volunteers and just really being intentional with the whole student.
Well, now tell us a little bit about, I don't need a huge dissertation, but, you know, tell us about these programs and a little bit about what they do.
Yeah, so I would say our two biggest ones are Campus Life and City Life. So Campus Life is really focused on going to the schools and being actually on the campus there, meeting students just in their normal walk of life. And so we do a lot of things with breakfast clubs or doing what we call club in the schools, which is just bringing a high energy, fun event to them there. City Life is a component that really more focuses on the neighborhood and the community that they're in. And so that's where like I said, we mentioned food, but also things like clothing, job security. We focus a lot more on just the holistic needs of a student. And so those are kind of the two big vehicles that we have. And then there's different programs that kind of fall around those as well. So there's a juvenile justice ministry. There's a parent ministry for teen parents. There's a deaf teen quest for teens that are deaf or hard of hearing. And then we also have camp, and camp is a big part of what we do over the summer. That can be a life-changing event for a young person that might not get to go and do those opportunities.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll take another short break and we'll continue our conversation with Youth for Christ when we come back. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
Dad, I'm not glitching.
I told you with our new Extreme Internet, it will be smooth streaming.
That's unbelievable.
Well, you better believe it, Missy.
I already finished streaming the whole second season of my show.
So start the third.
What the fast? That's really not frustrating.
I'll take that as a compliment.
You should.
I'm gonna get some ice cream. Do you want some?
With the drama-free reliability of Extreme Internet, you'll have to create your own. Get super fast internet with whole home Wi-Fi for as low as $24.99 a month for a year.
You told me not to talk to strangers. You told me not to cross the street without looking both ways.
You told me not to touch the stove. You told me not to do drugs. You told me not to drink and drive.
You gave me so many messages about how to stay safe. Why didn't you keep me safe by properly storing your gun?
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Mark, Parnell, and Jessica from Youth for Christ. It's so important to give kids the help they need to feel safe, loved, and happy. What is key to building a connection with faith? Well, I don't know what the real secret is, but Parnell, you might be able to shed some light on what some of those keys are.
Yeah, well, I think, the faith community has an opportunity, but even an obligation to step up and step into the lives of young people. One of my pet peeves is when folks say, and I'm sure you've heard this said, we need to get God back in the school. We need to get God back in the school. And that's one of my pet peeves, because it's like, no, we need God-fearing, faithful believers to get up off of the couch and help mentor young people and help go into the schools. My wife and I, we have 5 going on 6 boys, okay? And all of my boys love the Lord. 3 of the older ones, they're in school. And you know what? The Holy Spirit lives in them. So every time they walk into school, God isn't left outside of the school. He goes into school with them. And so if we had more adults that would connect with the mission of Youth for Christ to say, hey, we're tired of kids shooting up schools. We're tired of kids killing themselves. We're tired of bullying. We're tired of all of these things that are happening. I want to be a part of the solution, connect with Youth for Christ and help us go into these schools and build authentic Christ-sharing relationships with kids who need it the most.
I think that's fantastic. I know I grew up a pretty strict Roman Catholic kid, son of immigrants. And the fact is that, man, we were just drilled. God is always watching. I mean, whether you call it God or karma, you just can't call it nothing. There's something there, And so with that guidance, I still look back and say that was really instrumental in a young life. And a lot of young lives aren't seeing that. What kind of questions, Jessica, do you face with kids when they first start their journey? I mean, is it a questioning sort of journey for a lot of kids?
Oh, yeah. In fact, those are some of the best conversations when you really start asking them what questions they do have. Because I would say our students today, there's a hunger. There's, especially in election year, there's so much out there where they're not even sure what is true anymore. And of course, our culture says you find your own truth, you make your own truth. And I think students are really wisening up to the fact that that's not entirely true. And so they're starting to ask, like, how do I really know and who do I really trust? So we actually allowed them to start asking those questions, really helping them to start with framing their own worldview, understanding what their experiences were with faith growing up so far and what their family traditions are, helping them to kind of start to dive deeper. So our approach really isn't so much to, I would say, like, we don't indoctrinate. We really open up the floor to help them explore, ask questions, make informed decisions, and we guide them. But, with everything that's going on, there is a lot of questioning about why do things happen the way that they do, which really opens the door for us to start talking some really foundational faith things and asking them, what do they think? And so like you had mentioned, Peter, a lot of times our upbringing is just what we know. And so we get to open those doors for them.
That's fantastic. Mark, you've been around the bend. What have you seen as sort of a transformation in the populations of kids and volunteers that you've seen with the organization?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just this whole thing of like connecting with faith, right? I just had read about Friedrich Nietzsche had, this German philosopher had this massive idea of life without God, and before his death, it freaked him out because he said, the more he looked forward, we're looking into anarchy. And I think we're seeing that now, right? So back to when I think about that and think about people getting involved, and I think about parents and volunteers, we live in such a distracted society. And so getting parents and getting volunteers and stuff to be engaged and not be so distracted or busy, to just take a moment to spend some time with kids. Because Peter, what I can tell you is that sometimes it's literally in a 5-minute, 2-minute conversation that can completely change the trajectory of a kid's life forever. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, but it takes intentional time.
Well, and something that I'm getting a feeling as you guys are talking is that the world has changed dramatically in the sense that when you talk about media or world events or politics, it's no longer youth-centered. It's not kid-centered. You know, you go back 50 or 100 years and children were everything. It was all that parents invested in. They were grooming them to take over their businesses, their lives, to get better, to do better than they did. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I don't see children growing up in a world where they feel like they're the ones that we care about.
Right. Right.
Is that something you see as well? I mean, Jessica, you see kids, you talked about how they feel. Do we get that sense from them?
Well, I think that our students today, our kids are being forced to grow up so much faster. And the supports that, we had aren't there anymore because I think the world just does change so quickly. I think of my youngest is 10 years old, my own child, and he was talking about something that happened in our nation a couple of years ago. And I was like, how do you know that? Because it was a traumatic event. And he was like, I just know. And I just think back to when we were kids, like those were things that we didn't know about necessarily because they just weren't talked about. And today that's a pretty standard thing. So yeah, kids are definitely being forced to grow up and become adults much quicker than ever before.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to invite you back, all of you, to share some comments, insights, and inspiration about your work with Youth for Christ as a sort of final comments for our guest today. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Watching MC22 is now easier than ever before. All Mediacom customers can watch local programming online anytime. Go to mc22.net, click Watch MC22, and log in with your Mediacom account. Not a Mediacom cable subscriber? Mediacom internet or phone subscribers can watch too. Your local programming leader, MC22, online at mc22.net/watch.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about Youth for Christ and the growing movement to return to the Christian roots on which this country was built. Let's see what insights and inspiration our guests, Mark, Parnell, and Jessica from Youth for Christ, have to share. Jessica, let's start with you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think makes Youth for Christ really unique is just how we do our ministry, and we call it relational ministry. I always liken it to how Christ came to incarnate with us on earth. And so when we are in the public schools in a public setting, relational ministry looks like just being there, almost like we're on the mission field in the schools, meeting with the students right there where they're at. And so in a way, the way that we live our own lives is truly sharing the gospel with teens that we're around. And I know Parnell, he leads groups of students too in more of a rural area. And I know he sees some of the similar types of things and strategies that they do as well.
Yeah, Jessica, I love how you mentioned relational ministry. When I think about Jesus and how he, how he came to earth, right? And he met people where they were at, right? He met the woman out the well. He met a need first, and then through that need being met, whether it was a physical healing, right? Whether it was the prostitute that was getting ready to get stoned, or the woman that was getting ready to get stoned, he met people's needs where they were at, and then as a result, they were opened up to a whole new way of life. And that's Youth for Christ's approach to ministry. It's relational. We meet a tangible need. We meet a mentoring need. And as a result, those kids, these young people, ages 11 through 19, begin to open up to who Jesus is, all because we're open up to a relationship with them and meeting them where they're at.
Jesus is a superstar. 2,000 years ago, talk about how this survived and resonated. Can you even imagine people listening to Elvis Presley in 2,000 years or Taylor Swift? There's a powerful, powerful statement in a message that lasted and stayed for so long. Mark, it's got to be humbling to be out there and think about just the position you're in to help tie people in and connect them to such power.
Absolutely. Humbling and honoring too, right? I love the name of the show, Surviving the Bad, because when I look at my own life, I look at many lives of kids, like Jesus comes in, and with him, he's the one that helps us survive all the bad. Like he's the one that drives, like he takes the bad and makes it good. And what's so beautiful about him is he works all things out for our good who are in Christ Jesus. And he can take this bad stuff and turn it to good. He did it in my life, and it is humbling, but it's also an honor. And to be able to enter into the life of a kid that's lost and broken and tell them that this Jesus is radically in love with them, and he's in a hot pursuit of them because he's got plans for their life that they could never imagine.
Parnell, just a little bit of time for some final comments from you and Jessica. What would you like to leave our guests with as a thought?
You know, the word says, the Bible says that the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. But it tells us as believers to pray for the laborers. So if you're watching this program and you love the Lord, you have a passion for kids, and you want to see change, my encouragement is to get involved, whether it's going into the schools, whether it's transporting kids to camp, whether it's baking brownies. I like brownies. You know, most of our viewers like brownies. Whatever it is, however you can connect to the mission of Youth for Christ, I encourage you to get involved.
And Jessica?
I would just say you can have so much hope in the future that we have. The students that we get to work with, they are bright. They are asking good questions. When I think about the state of our world today, sometimes you can really focus on the negative. We really get to see the amazing work that God is doing through their lives. And I just feel honored and humbled every day as well, just looking at the small part that I get to play in these students' lives and knowing the ripple effects that are going to come from that. So I think every day we can wake up with joy and hope in our hearts and knowing that we're moving in a good place because God is working.
Well, thank you all so very much for sharing this positive message with us today. And I give you all my support for what you're doing. And thank you all for watching today. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.